So I am very excited to welcome our presenter, Joan Carnaccio, Associate Director of Supported Decision Making, New York. Joan has been with the SDMNY project since its inception in 2016. She's engaged as a mentor and a facilitator in the lives of nearly 100 decision makers as they develop their agreements. She's been instrumental in trainings for facilitators like myself across the state and co-developed and delivered a supported decision-making curriculum for transition-age students and students in inclusive post-secondary education in New York City. Formerly, she was an advocate and private consultant to families of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism in New York and Massachusetts in their local school districts. Joan holds an advanced certification in disability studies and an MS in education from Syracuse University, which is where my city, SU, go SU. She is currently in the process of completing Community Dispute Resolution Center mediation training through the New York Peace Institute. Joan is also the mother of 2 adult children, including a daughter who proudly identifies as a decision maker. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joan.
Thank you so much, Kate. Very happy to be here tonight on this wintry night. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me while I do that. Okay, play from start. All right, you can all see my screen?
Beautiful.
All right, awesome. I can't see you anymore, so that's the only problem. But
I'll be your eyes, Joan.
You'll be my eyes. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm proud of myself because I like to think of myself as an older person who has kept current with technology. And I learned for the first time tonight how to screen share on WebEx. I usually screen share in Zoom. So this is a little different looking, and I'm looking into the void, but I trust that you're there, and Kate will monitor the chat, etc. All right, so moving on to our first slide here. I'd like to start by this is just an overview, so you'll know what we're going to be covering in our time tonight. I will allow, maybe 10 minutes or so at the end for questions, and then also follow-ups. I'll tell you how to follow up with us if you would like to be in touch. So I'm going to cover a little bit about the history of the project from when we launched in 2016. And take you up to 2025, which is around the corner at this point. Tonight, we'll be speaking about supported decision-making from a human rights perspective. You'll hear about guardianship, what that is in a formal kind of definition way, and then also what supported decision-making is. But we will really be focusing on supported decision-making tonight. We'll talk about the process, the supported decision-making New York, or SDMNY process, how facilitation actually happens. So if you're thinking of a particular person, a decision maker, a person with an intellectual or developmental disability who would be interested or perhaps is on the call tonight in participating, you'll want to stay tuned for how the facilitation process actually evolves. And I will say that both Kate and Shailene Fellows, who are with us tonight, are both trained facilitators, and we're thrilled to have them as partners. And then we'll end by talk a little bit about the future of SDM in New York State. Okay. So without any further ado, a little history. We started in 2016. We received a grant from the New York State Disability Planning Council, which now has a different name, but it's the same organization. And that 5-year grant was a time where we were tasked with providing proof of concept that supported decision-making could become an alternative to guardianship, a viable alternative. So we did an awful lot of outreach during that time, a lot of education of various stakeholders, etc. Then the pandemic happened, and we were really, really fortunate to receive funding from 3 fantastic organizations, the FAR Fund, the Taft Fund, Foundation rather, and notably the Ford Foundation. And I say notably because the Ford Foundation had, to that point, never granted a disability, had funded a disability program. So that was super exciting and a real honor for us. And we're forever grateful that that happened. We learned how to continue to operate remotely, as we all, there was that learning curve for all of us. We figured out how to use Zoom and other platforms and reach decision makers across the state. And that was really important to be able to say, we did our 5 years. In the first 5 years, we need a bit more time. We're really moving forward with this. We're not exactly a household name yet, supported decision making, but great progress is being made. I will note that back when we started the project in 2016, there were only 4 states in the country that recognized legally supported decision making, and I think we're up to 16 now. New York signed in 2022. I think we were the 14th state in the country. We're now under the OPWDD auspices, the Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. We have this 3-year grant. We're in the 3rd year of this grant to really build a system that is going to be sustainable for the long term. It will be a service delivery system through New York State, and it will be it will in the future be funded, or can be funded. One stream of funding will be through the Medicaid waiver system and through self-direction budgets. Right now, it's entirely free. We've trained partners across the state, including our wonderful people here tonight that I mentioned. And we have learned so much and continue to learn so much about how this really can scale up so that it becomes available for anyone across the state with IDD that wants to participate and sign a supported decision-making agreement. Some of the goals we met, as I said before, educated stakeholders on this emerging practice of supported decision-making. Our project director, our founding director, Kristen Booth Glenn, Honorable Kristen Booth Glenn, former surrogate judge of Manhattan and also Dean Emerita of the CUNY Law School. This was her vision. She wrote the grant along with other partners from Hunter College, which is where we began. And we were granted this opportunity to bring supported decision-making to the diversity of New York. I had originally started out in 2016 as the education coordinator for the 5 boroughs, and went from school to school, talked to lots of administrators, different teachers, family members, self-advocates, etc. We developed our facilitation process, which originally was just a 1-day training with 1 phase and morphed into 3 phases because we realized there was so much work to be done. So we now have a 3-phase facilitation process. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And as I said before, we were really tasked with creating an evidentiary base for supported decision-making to become a legal entity in the state. Okay, lots of recognition, lots of successes. Not going to read all of these, and there are many, many more. So you can read this for yourself. But importantly, Governor Hochul signed this bill on the anniversary of the ADA on July 26th of 2022. And it was she came down to New York City, and the signing took place at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, 5th Avenue and 34th Street. We had partners from all over the state there. We had decision makers, we had self-advocates, we had family members, lots of stuff on our website about this auspicious day. It was super exciting to be in the space and watched Governor Hochul sign this bill. So what is guardianship? One definition states it's the legal process by which the right and power to make decisions and enter into legal relationships is removed from one person because of their alleged incapacity and given instead to another, the guardian. In New York State is unique in that there are 2 statutes for guardianship. There's Article 81 that is a tailored guardianship. It is mostly used for people not with IDD. It's mostly used for people who have cognitive decline, for example, for whom having their property or their person protected in certain ways can be determined by having a guardianship in place. 17A is the guardianship statute for people with IDD in New York, and this was instituted as a result of the presidential task force under Lyndon B. Johnson back in 1969, as a result of the deinstitutionalization movement. And I say this every time I do a presentation. If you're not familiar with Willowbrook, which was one of the most notorious state institutions in the country, really, in Staten Island, you could YouTube Willowbrook and learn about really the horrific conditions under which people with IDD were supposedly living and being educated. So it was right and proper that the institution should be closed. At the time, it was right and proper that parents wanted protection for people with IDD were considered forever children back then, right? We didn't have laws protecting people with disabilities. We didn't have educational programs and least restrictive environments for education. So this is the law, and it is not a tailored guardianship. It's blanket, and depending on what county you live in, even there, one can lack the capacity to vote, to marry, to enter into any kinds of contracts, and certainly to be in charge of their healthcare decisions. So that is all changing. Parents often seek guardianship based on, historically, it's been the default. Kids are graduating, leaving school, they have an IEP, they've been in the K through 12 system, and exiting high school, and very often school officials, medical providers also at this age will say this is a transition time. Your child will now be 18. That's legal age of majority. You need to seek guardianship. Outdated model in many, many ways. I'm not to say that guardianship is not something that is important or useful for people with profound disabilities. But with all the other alternatives that are possible, other instruments such as healthcare proxies, powers of attorneys, et cetera, many more individuals now are choosing to not go the guardianship route, use supported decision-making, especially now that we have the legal statute in New York State, and also use the other instruments. And I'm happy to answer questions about that later. I already talked a little bit about this belief that guardianship will protect children, and concern that folks with IDD are not able to make large, big life decisions. No one is saying that any of us really make those decisions, any decisions on our own, big decisions on our own. So I always like to kind of pause at this moment and ask each of you, I'll stop sharing for a moment and ask you to just perhaps put in the chat examples of large life decisions you might have made for yourself where you needed guidance or needed support, whether it would have been financial decisions, healthcare decisions, entering into contracts of any kind, whether that was to get married or not get married, setting up trusts, etc. So, and Kate, we'll give people maybe 2 minutes to do that. I always like people to just kind of look at their lives for a moment and think, oh, yeah, I get support for certain decisions I make in my life, of course. So I'd love to see some examples. Purchasing a house, says Robin. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big decisions, many, many decisions that go into that.
Read my mind, Robin.
What else is coming through? Anything at all? Buying a car. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So many choices on the road. Although so many cars all look alike these days, it's almost like you're driving on the highway and it's like that Volvo looks just like that Rogue. Trust for my mother and sister. Beautiful example. Yeah, for sure. Recently, retirement. Yeah. And what that means. Lots of people are referring to retirement as evolving, the next phase in life of evolving. I love that. take maybe one or two more. What credit card to apply for? Oh, Robin, absolutely. Yes, applying for college. Gorgeous. All right, these are all fantastic examples. Thank you so much for I can't talk and share at the same time, as you can tell. Okay, back to play from current slide. Okay, so um, why should an individual with IDD not be given the opportunity to explore decision making with support, just like any of us, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. I just wanted to note this third bullet here because this is the other reason a lot of people have sought guardianship historically. The third parties, as in healthcare providers, landlords, financial institutions, may refuse to provide services. You know, opening a checking account, for example, or treating somebody that has a medical issue without being under guardianship. So that is the climate of that is all changing. We'll talk a little more about that later. I mentioned some of these, but I didn't name them. So the ADA, the IDEA, right, Individuals Disability Education Act, I think I got that right, and the Rehab Act of 1973. None of these laws were in effect back in 69, right? Concept of least restrictive environment. My kids are in their 30s and my daughter with a IDD, her brother's was 4 grades ahead of her. He was in the 4th grade when she was in kindergarten. In his class, so this is back in the mid 90s, his class was the first in our district to have an inclusion model. So that was really an exciting moment. And because he had a sister with a disability, at lunchtime, my son and his buddies, who were all neurotypical kids, wanted to spend time and hang out with Brian, who had Down syndrome. You know, they were used to being around a person with a disability. Okay. Disability rights movement, super important in what has really changed and the work. I always want to note the esteemed, beautiful work of Judy Heumann, who we lost about a year and a half ago. Judy was an extraordinary civil rights lawyer and activist, and another great YouTube moment for any of you who have not seen this. I'm giving you a little history tonight. The climbing up the Capitol steps, throwing their wheelchairs, tossing the wheelchairs off to the side, and literally climbing up the Capitol steps in Washington, demanding accessibility. So that was the beginning of the ADA. Okay. Supported decision making. What on earth is it actually? I like this scholarly definition because of some of the language here by Bob Dinnerstein, who up until very recently was the director of the Disability Rights Law Clinic at American U. STM is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements of more or less formality and intensity designed to assist an individual with a disability to make and communicate to others decisions about the individual's life. Sounds like a lot of words. What I'd like you to focus on for the moment is relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements of more or less formality and intensity. And think about some of the examples that you put in the chat a little while ago and how these series of agreements work, right? Many of you mentioned some of the formal ones, or some of you did, right? Setting up a trust was one. That's a formal agreement, right? Buying a car, well, you sign a contract when you buy that car, but getting support for the decision, unless you sign something with your, whoever helps you. Like I am asking you to help me, and we're going to check off these boxes, and you're going to make sure that you're going to help me make this decision. You know where I'm going with this. So really, this is what supported decision making is about. We all use it. I want to normalize the concept of the support in the decision making because we all do it in our lives. So how does supported decision making function as an alternative to the guardianship? Person retains all their rights, never loses those important rights. The dignity of risk piece that we all learn from trial and error, right? research shows that we actually learn more from our failures than our successes, or our successes happen as a result of those failures, right? Nobody wants to fail. None of us set out to fail, but it's the trial and the error and figuring out what didn't quite work, unpacking what didn't quite work. And I'm using that word particularly because I'm going to talk about unpacking of decisions and mapping of decisions in a little while. That's how we learn and that's how we grow. So allowing a person with IDD to take some risks in their decision making and learn from those choices. The third piece here is super important, this enhanced support. Ideally, a person is creating a supported decision-making agreement with a group of supporters that they have chosen. These are people they have a relationship with that are trusted. It can be parents, it can be siblings, it can be cousins, it can be uncles, it can be friends, it can be ComHab workers, it can be providers. It can be a self-direction broker. Lots of different ways supporters show up. Ideally, there should be at least 2 supporters on a supported decision-making agreement, not one person, for all the reasons, right? Not having someone else to, bounce ideas off of, different expertise, different frames of mind, different perspective. In my family alone, I am the mom who I believe in letting my kids spread their wings, the one with the disability and the neurotypical. My husband has always been more protective, right? So we work together. There's that balance. There's the checks and balances that happen because we all look at things with a different lens. So ideally, there's less vulnerability. If there's one person overseeing everything, and I'm thinking about, in a typical guardianship situation, it's one person as opposed to a group. And importantly, right, you're exercising the human right to make decisions. That really is the definition of being human, that we can be decision makers and we can be in charge of our own ways of functioning in the world. So super important concepts here. Different kinds of supported decision making. Some can be informal, as was stated on that the slide about the definition. Some of them can be written or oral, right? The process that is vetted by OPWDD is the formal facilitated SDMA, supported decision-making agreement, right? That results in the signed agreement. That's our model. And whoops, that's the second time I've done that tonight. Sorry about that. Third parties are required by law to accept decisions made by persons with SDMAs. That is our future model here in New York. It says regulations are in process. So what that means is Governor Hochul signed the bill, and every bill has to go through a process of then having, each piece of it vetted and approved. So there was a public comment period, at which point the statute went out to everyone, and anyone and everyone could make comments. We encouraged self-advocates to make comments on the statute as well, and that the closing period for that was the end of September. So we're now basically still playing the waiting game for the final stamp. That's where we are. So I should just add that once that final stamp of approval for the statute is in place, all supported decision-making agreements that have been developed and created and signed since the inception of our project back in 2016 will be grandparented in under this bill. Okay, so the actual statute is Article 82 of the Mental Hygiene Law. You could go to OPWDD's website and just even put in supported decision-making statute, and you can pull up the law. You'll see all the different articles under the law. You can read about the roles and responsibilities and commitments supporters make to decision makers. You'll learn about how decision makers have to want to engage in and commit to being involved in this meaningful process. You'll learn about the requirements of third parties to honor this agreement. Right. So I pretty much covered all of this except, oh, right, the last part. Oh my goodness, 3 times is a charm, Joan. Keep doing that. My tracker is very sensitive. So I'm sorry, the last piece here, legalized by statute. Third parties are required to accept the decisions made by persons with SDMAs, right? So what does that actually mean? It means that a person with IDD, I realize I'm not on the same, it's more or less the same thing here on this slide though. I had a very long day. I'm so sorry. It basically means that a person can't be stigmatized any longer for having a disability, right? A person with a disability under this law is presumed to have capacity. And that is a profound thing to say and to believe. So that's where we are with this new law. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide very carefully. There we go. My favorite part, I get to talk about the facilitation process a little bit, and then you'll see a short video, so you won't have to hear from me the entire presentation tonight. We have 3 phases. Phase 1 is an experience between the decision maker who has signed up and wants to do this and their facilitator that they've been matched with. Facilitator is trained. We match up decision makers to the facilitators. And in this first phase, which goes on for a couple of months, people meet about every other week for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the attention, of the person and the interest. Sometimes some people will go for an hour, others. So let's average it out to maybe 35, 40 minutes for most individuals. It's really a conversation, and Kate and Shailene could speak to this as well because they've facilitated as well. It's really learning about the decision maker. How do they even think about decisions? What is a decision? How do I make a decision? Well, starting with very simple things like the clothes you're wearing today. Did you choose those? Did you choose your lunch today? When was the last time you went on a family vacation? If we're talking about a younger person, were you part of the conversation about where to choose to go? If you're an 18-year-old transitioning into a life skills program, will there be internship possibilities? Do you have choices to make along those lines? So all of those, you're talking about if there are young parents of younger kids here on this call tonight, I always say, start with those little ones. Start with your 3-year-old, your 6-year-old, in terms of small little things, strawberries or blueberries, whatever it is. At the end of phase 1, there's a sense from both the decision maker and the facilitator that there's an understanding about decision making. There's an idea of the kinds of support that the person might want, and an education of who might be prospective supporters. Those prospective supporters are invited to participate in phase 2. Phase 2 is an education process, just like we're doing tonight. And it's an opportunity for prospective supporters to learn about SDM&Y and to understand their roles, commitments, and responsibilities to the decision maker. And that's a lot because there's this whole kind of pivoting out of your normal role. So again, I've stated I'm a mom. Can I be a mom? I'm always going to be a mom, but can I also put on my supporter hat for my daughter, right? And really listen to her as an adult in terms of how she's thinking about her decisions, and really watch how I use my language. Do you want support with this? As opposed to, well, if I were you, this is the way I would do it, right? Kind of thing. So we could talk a whole lot more about that. Once supporters in this phase commit to being part of the process, phase 3 begins, and that's really where everything comes together. The decision maker, the facilitators, and the supporters work over a series of meetings to create a supported decision-making agreement. Everybody signs it, and then there's a celebration at the end, a signing ceremony. The process takes usually about 9 months to go through. This slide just talks about the steps in decision-making, right? And some of the examples that you gave me in the chat, if you think back on those, you had to gather information about whatever it was you wanted to make the decision about. You had to understand the information, perhaps consider different possibilities and alternatives, right? The different options that are available. And then think about the consequences of those different options, right? So we break all of this information down for the decision maker so that then, can start to weigh the options to decide. Communicating decisions to others can actually be a step of support, right? You know what you want to do. Who do you need to communicate this to? Do you need support for communicating? And are you going to need some support for carrying out what you decided? So these are the basic steps in decision making. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for the moment. I have something else I might share with you a little bit later, since I have now figured out how to share. This is our Big Four chart. This is the heart of the work that actually translates into an agreement eventually, not with all these pretty icons. So we've got health, work, money, education. On the second page, housing, services, community access, relationships. Sometimes people may add their own domain, their own area that they want support in. These are the typical life domains, right, if you will. So it's called the Big Four chart because we have the areas, that's one. The types of support you might want, that's two. Who's going to support you, that's three. And how do you want that support, that's four. So it's the Big Four. Lots of things to talk about, lots of information to understand here, going through the different steps in decision making, thinking about different supporters for different areas. And then the how is really the logistics behind how, what's going to happen. Are you going to have monthly Zoom calls with your cousin in California? And people do actually choose people remotely that they're close to, and talk about how your relationships with your coworkers are going, or how things are going in your class, or that girl or that girl or guy that you like. How's that going, right? So I'm just picking one example there. Notice I didn't pick mom as a supporter for relationships. Lots of times, particularly with young people, they want support from peer age supporters. Okay, I am going to stop talking and I'm going to stop sharing because Kate has been kind enough to queue up a video. This video will illustrate a little bit about how a parent thought through supported decision-making, supported SDM&Y, came to their school of her son. We did a information session, and Beth and her family actually stopped their guardianship proceedings when they heard about supported decision-making. So without further ado, we'll hear from Beth. Thanks, Kate.
My name is Beth. I'm a supporter and parent of a young man who's a ever-growing identity as a decision maker. And we've been lucky enough to be part of this supported decision-making New York project. Our son is now 20, has an intellectual and developmental disability, and we were lucky enough to be diverted towards supported decision-making right when we were at the cusp of actually pursuing guardianship. So it was really fortunate the project team came to our son Thomas's program, and the minute we heard about it and began to have conversation with this great group, it felt like a big relief. We're able to take a deep breath because of the opportunities in this new model just seemed to resonate with us. We felt like he spent so much time trying to find his voice, and to not have an ongoing system that supported that, but rather took away his voice, was something that we just kept drudging through because we were encouraged that was a safe thing we needed to do to protect our son. And to have now this other framework that actually supports all the work that he's been doing to be more of a decision maker, to honor that, and to have that so well facilitated. Just we're so grateful and happy about it. I think The big things that we've noticed and are really excited about is to watch our son grow in the process, and for also all of us who are in his family and his supporters and our friends to actually re-examine how we are with him and how we have changed our perspective to find different ways of supporting his identity as a decision maker, that he does have strengths in all of these different areas and ability to identify his preferences for people who are going to support him, that really only took place by this very high quality facilitation. So I don't think this is a I'm trying to think, I want to say from a policy perspective, this needs to be really well supported to make sure that it can be really successful, given that there's some quality facilitation built in. It's been a ongoing process. It did take time for my son to start identifying himself as a decision maker and understanding the pride and further development he has once that began. Was really exciting. And it really, I think, expanded our perspective for him, rather than starting to feel like as things were ending, that his world was constricting. And this has really changed our perspective, and I think has given him a platform to become just more and more of himself and have the opportunity to have that be supported. So thank you. We're really happy to be involved.
Thanks, Kate. Beth is also very involved in I've had a number of meetings with her to discuss how to educate the medical community about supported decision making. Beth is associate professor of nursing at NYU. So we've talked about working with her, with the nursing school students, knowing so often that, the nursing nurses in various settings are really the first line so often for people. And so she's been just invaluable in so many ways. And I've stayed in touch with Thomas. He signed his agreement when he was 19, and he's now 26. And I get invited to his birthday party every year. It's very fun. All right. So just a couple more slides before, am I still sharing? I can't tell. Yes?
Yep. Still sharing.
Wonderful.
It's just not full screen.
Yeah. There we go. Now we are. Okay. Perfect. So some of the results of SDM&Y facilitation, there's a signed agreement at the end, as we said before, that outlines the areas, the types, and the sources of support determined by the decision maker in a collaborative process. And I say that quite deliberately, the collaborative piece, because it starts with just the facilitator and the decision maker together. And very often sometimes parents are concerned at that beginning place. Well, what if you're going to get half information from my son? Or, they're not the best reporter of information, so on and so forth. It's not about that so much as where is this person growing in terms of their competency? Where is this person growing in terms of their self-determination, right? And their autonomy and their right to be a decision maker. That's the important piece. So the planting of those seeds is really the important piece, not whether everything is being told as, completely truthful or comprehensive or anything of that nature. So that is really why it's set up with phase one, with just between the decision maker and the facilitator, except under, special circumstances where somebody might need support for communication and other issues. But in general, it's, it's just one-to-one. It's a flexible, modifiable document. So it is meant to be a living, breathing instrument that a person lives with their entire lives, right? Decision maker at 20 is going to choose certain supporters. At 40, there's going to be different people in that person's life. And that's the whole point of having it. We actually have modifications to the document. There's attachments to the actual document. One is modification form. Another one is a revocation form if somebody wants to just remove their SDMA, in which case they have to have it notarized, or I think they have to have that one notarized. The SDMA itself can either be witnessed by two people or notarized. So I have to check again on if you're removing your SDMA, whether it's the same. I'm not. I should know this, because I do this for a living. I'll look at it more carefully again. And so for example, like a power of attorney, anybody could just rip it up. So we really, we try to have a little bit more control over what this SDMA is going to look like by having people have to witness it, sign it, etc. Okay. We've already talked a lot about the enhanced self-determination, confidence, and autonomy for the decision maker, and that is the super important piece of this. Think about if you have a loved one or know of a loved one when they were really young and maybe starting and I know for my own daughter, she had so much OT and PT and equine therapy and all sorts of things, and how much she grew, her adaptive skills really developed over the time, right? And that is, along with her adaptive skills, her competence and her confidence in herself grew. So same thing here. Change relationships between the DM and supporters and even the facilitator. Everyone goes through this process and there's a shift in the relationship. Parents often then can really look at their young person as a young adult who's going to make mistakes like we all do. Maybe embrace a little more this concept of dignity of risk, which is part of being alive. But really, it's exciting. And I've facilitated, I think, 25 DMs, something like that, decision makers, and every single one of them has been different. It's always been exciting. All right. So future of SDM, as we've talked about, the legislation, right? We're still waiting now for the final stamp on the statute, so it becomes law. We talked, so just to sum things up, statewide delivery system through OPWDD. I want to focus a little on the outreach and education. Obviously, that's part of what we're doing tonight. Thank you again, Kate, for hosting us this evening. We have developed a curriculum. So first, it started out as a pilot at the Cook School, which is a special education school in Manhattan. It was a supported decision-making curriculum in an after-school program to really bring to the students. These were late high school, early transition age students. So some of the students were already in the transition program at Cook, to really talk about decision-making and supported decision-making. We also brought it into, and Kate talked about this in my bio, we then also piloted this supported decision-making curriculum in some of the inclusive higher education programs at some of the community colleges in the New York area. In addition to that, our project associate at the School of Education at Hunter College, Professor Gina Riley, developed she received a grant from the DDPC to develop a decision-making curriculum. The emphasis on decision-making, so that kids as young as pre-K all the way through 12th grade are now learning about decision-making, and it's being embedded in their curriculum, whether it's geography, science, math, music, and the arts, language arts, through the SEL, social emotional learning initiatives, which schools are big on. And this curriculum is now in 70 schools across the state of New York. When Gina started 2 years ago, I think it was last September. I mean, literally 10 schools. Last spring, it was 40 schools. It's up to 70. It's probably even more than that now. So it's really exciting. The whole idea, if we can get decision-making curriculum in the schools, there won't be a need for supported decision-making built, right? Because everyone's going to know and have some skills around being decision makers. Okay. So this QR code will get you to us. We run events regularly. We actually run information sessions. In fact, there's one taking place tonight in the SDM&Y Zoom room for very similar to this, just an information session for anyone who wanted to learn about supported decision-making. little less comprehensive than this particular presentation, giving a snapshot of what's involved. And I say that not to degrade it, because it's wonderful. But in addition to that, so that's like step one, and then step two is decision makers who want to participate, or the parents are thinking, "Wow, this might be great." They talk to their loved one, and then that prospective decision maker, comes to a sign up session to learn about how to sign. Well, actually, literally to sign up and to participate. We also have a Facebook page and all these other social media things, but also you can get on our mailing list we send out every Friday good news on the project.